Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Adithya Sivakumar. He's a medical student and he wrote the Kevin MD article, Medical Students, It is Time to Stop Being Spectators. Adithya, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was younger, I think I'm definitely a big history nerd. So I would definitely look through Wikipedia, look through history books, trying to see all these kinds of connections in the past and trying to see how these different events led to where we are today. While I was doing that, I was also a little bit interested in healthcare, but I wasn't really sure why. And then I slowly found kind of how healthcare just has a bunch of stories behind it and how they all intersect to make a person or health outcomes in general. So just looking at those two different types of connections really brought me towards medicine, just looking at the different stories people have and how sometimes the medical field streamlines it into one kind of sector, one paragraph to make everything easier. But in essence, that sometimes discriminates and disenfranchises some people who need better care. So I think that's why I kind of primarily got involved in medicine, to take care of all of the stories that a patient may bring or people entering the healthcare system may bring, so that we have a more equitable health outcome throughout the United States.
So you're in between your first and second year of medical school.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how the pandemic has affected your medical training so far.
Yeah, definitely. So about March, we were chugging along, and I think it kind of felt like things were falling in slow motion. In essence, I just remember that week vividly. Slowly, people were starting to stay home, and then we moved from in classes to virtual. So it's definitely a change in that most of our sessions, Rush does a really good job of having us self-study a lot of our material. So we're able to take in all the material ahead of time and not really worry about having the lecture component, different kind of space. So that's been really nice for us. However, there are some parts which are difficult, obviously, like anatomy and like clinical skills, just because those are so in person and you just need to see those up close. But our curriculum is doing a really good job of kind of integrating those into an online format. And overall, it's been a generally smooth transition, and they've always been receptive to our comments.
And how's the fall semester shaping up?
Right now, it looks like it's going to be a hybrid curriculum, half online, half in person. The items I mentioned before, like anatomy and clinical skills, those would be more in person, just because a lot of the things that we skipped, like in person, like musculoskeletal and neuro exams, those things are generally like things we would want to know later coming on rotations and things like that. So we're going to definitely focus on those in person, and anatomy will be a little more spread out than it usually was. So that's another thing that will be in person, but everything else, like our lectures, our basic science sessions, those will all be online.
All right. Well, best wishes to you as you progress.
Thank you.
So let's talk about your Kevin MD article. Medical students, it is time to stop being spectators. Now, for those who haven't read your article, can you walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Yeah, definitely. So it kind of touches back to what I was talking about before. I'm just a huge history nerd. So I saw something similar in how we were responding to this pandemic as we might have looked at the Civil War or different items in the past. So my article kind of starts off at the first Battle Bull Run, I believe. It kind of starts off there and says how a bunch of spectators from the Union came to see the Union fight the Confederacy in their first major battle. And they thought it was going to be a rout. It was going to be so fun. But then in just a second, the Confederacy took over and defeated the Union in that battle. And the spectators also started running. So I kind of saw that as a parallel with COVID-19 at the time, just seeing that in the beginning where we were looking at it. I just remember looking at it in the beginning that it was, just a start to the pandemic. We've seen H1N1, we've seen Ebola, we've seen all these different kinds of diseases. Our healthcare system obviously has many faults, but somehow we got through it. And I thought COVID-19 would be very similar. Instead, everything just kind of, I wouldn't say imploded, but it definitely went in a direction which wasn't very exciting for us. So obviously a lot of lockdowns, people were getting accustomed to the new normal. And I felt a lot of people like me, health professional students, medical students who came into medical school to undertake the desire of helping people out were kind of like out of the loop now, since they weren't directly able to do that duty. And that's where I kind of came up with the idea to kind of give suggestions to medical students to start getting involved if they wanted to and if they felt safe. So things like volunteering. Back then, PPE was in great shortage. So I was talking about PPE drives that fellow students were doing, or going to blood drive. Also taking consideration, the pandemic has been racialized sometimes. So just because of the connotations that some have thrown around about where the virus came from, and like how there have been racist attacks against people of Asian descent due to that. And lastly, just taking a step back and seeing what we can do differently in the future. There's definitely going to be a lot of talk and policy changes around what we do concerning pandemics in the future, especially what we've gone through now.
Sure.
So just taking all of those in consideration and trying to help medical students go on their path in that way.
Sure. Now, for medical students who certainly want to get involved, whether it's volunteering and whatnot, what are some of the avenues? What are some of the ways that they can look for these opportunities to still participate, especially as the pandemic is continuing or even worsening?
Definitely. So a lot of medical schools are doing avenues where you can do screenings in multiple like homeless shelters or nursing homes and things like that. So things that do require patient contact, but are a little more, I guess, less invasive than you would say going directly into the hospital sometimes if you're like me, a first or second year medical student who is still in the preclinical stages. Organizing blood drives has also been really necessary. There's also been a lot of other situations that have arisen since March, such as racial justice and items like that. So I've seen a lot of medical students getting involved in that respite, like showing that there's a connection between racial inequities in healthcare and COVID-19 especially. So taking a front and taking leadership on these points has definitely been helpful to a lot of medical students, just seeing these types of connections and trying to get people more aware of it so they can reduce those inequities.
Sure. So you mentioned you're a big history buff. Are there any lessons from history that you can think of that can be applied to today's situation with the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, you would think so. I feel like there's been a lot of similar things in the past. We always go back now to the 1918, 1919 flu pandemic and just seeing how a lot of similar things were happening. We were caught off guard. People were resisting wearing masks. And in essence, they said, okay, we know what to do now. We know how to quarantine. We know how to kind of study a virus if it comes about, but we just tend to just forget those lessons. There's like a quote that I love. It's just basically how history kind of repeats itself. And it's just very difficult for generations to understand what the previous generation has been through. So just kind of looking at these kind of avenues. So like the flu pandemic in 1918, 1919, we had H1N1 in 2008, 2009. And I feel that one especially, there was an opinion among some people that we overreacted to it, especially since we didn't go through the same quarantine measures. We didn't do anything. The fatality rate wasn't maybe as high, but it's still that kind of led people in another direction saying, oh, we need to reduce our pandemic response, when the opposite was actually true. It was good that we overreacted and potentially saved a lot of lives there.
Sure. We're talking to Adithya Sivakumar. He's a medical student. He wrote the Kevin MD article, Medical Students, It is Time to Stop Being Spectators. Adithya, is there anything that you've learned over the last few months that you could pass on to your fellow medical students? Is there any advice that you could share as they're progressing through their medical training during the pandemic?
Yeah, so definitely one advice that I have is stay involved with health equity and health outcome measures, especially in these kinds of times. I think it's really easy to be sucked into your own curriculum and just start looking at the basic sciences and your organ systems, which is really important. However, I think we should also still be looking at the bigger picture here, looking at population health, looking at racial justice in healthcare, and just seeing ways that we can help out rather than just us in the physician room. Our impact should go beyond our appointments and rather go into our daily lives. So I would suggest a lot of medical students and health profession students to take kind of a look of how they kind of conduct themselves and what kind of brought them into medicine, and see how they can help out using their reasons on a daily basis instead of just using it as something that helps you on a personal statement, but instead helps you motivate yourself to be a doctor.
And my final question, do you have a take-home message that you want to share with the Kevin MD audience?
So I think my take-home message is definitely take time to understand those around you and take time to kind of understand how society functions around you, because I think it's very easy as a medical student and in the practice of medicine overall to just get sucked into your little bubble of how you're perceived, and this can kind of lead you to false assumptions about how you're supposed to practice. So definitely take into consideration how medicine has been portrayed in different communities, how it has been used in different communities to sometimes promote harm, and take that in consideration when you're questioning someone for being disbelieving of medicine and sometimes. So just take in consideration all factors that medicine plays in someone's life and then make a decision to do it for the better good.
Adithya, thank you so much for your time and insight, and thank you again for being on the show.
No problem. Thank you so much.